Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvighna Kuru Me Deva Sarvakareshu Sarvada Saraswati Namastubhyam Vade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada Om Bhurvasvaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavavahe Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to some of our new people. So we made it about a third of the way through chapter 2 last time, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, good. I have things to talk about. But if we're going to try to kind of get on this, I definitely want to make sure that we stay on topic, because otherwise we won't finish it. Yeah. So we started, we probably ended right around kind of, I don't remember exactly, I think right around on page, I photocopied these, so I think my page numbers got cut off. Verse 37 or so.
That's what I thought.
Somewhere in that range, I think we cut off. So does anyone, that was here last week, have any sort of follow-ups or any thoughts from last time, or we just want to jump in?
I would say just jump in.
All right.
There's a lot to do.
Yeah. All right, sounds good. So, all right, does anyone want to start? It doesn't have to be me always starting everything. Does anyone have anything that they want to sort of, anything to highlight? I think we just kind of will follow the flow of the text, because if we jump around, then, we potentially miss a little bit of stuff. Any thoughts on kind of like from 37 or kind of going into, I just want this not to be about me giving a discourse, right? So any thoughts on that? I mean, I have plenty to say, but I don't want it to only be me.
Yeah, I think the first third of the chapter just discusses about just looking at the entire philosophy of life and death, and looking at soul and how it's not destructible, and then the second half comes into how and what we can apply when we are living in this age, so that it's easier for us to not think about ourselves just as human beings, but like what actions we can take or how we need to act,
right,
in order to identify that inner self.
Right. Anyone else? Okay. Well, one thing that I liked, so if we take verse 37, right, where death means the attainment of heaven, right? So obviously we're doing in the context, Krishna is telling Arjuna, like, hey, like, you win either way, right? You fight the battle and you get killed, you go to heaven and you're happy, right? You fight the battle and you win the battle, you have the kingdom and you have all the riches. So you're a win-win, right, in that sense. So, I look at that also, because say, well, we're not fighting this battle like, the literal battle, now we have to start switching to us. How do you guys interpret that part in terms of in relationship to us and our lives? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how that might apply to us here and now, and outside of the context of the battlefield?
I see that as long as you are doing your action resolved in your faith, essentially, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, because you did it within that intention. And that's why, like, if you're doing it dharmically, essentially, if you're doing it dharmically, then there is no loss, because you fulfill the dharma regardless.
Right, and that's the whole gist of karma yoga.
Yeah.
Right, in which we're going to
just do your dharma.
Transition to.
Just do your dharma. That's it.
So there's often also this sort of thing. So there's this interest. I was reading this book on Shaivism, Kashmiri Shaivism, which is really interesting. I think I mentioned that in the past. Where, you know, when we look at the four, what are the four goals of life, right? In traditional, you know, in the Manusmriti, like, right, the traditional Hindu, it's Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha, right? And so a lot of times, if we think about that, there's sort of this innate push and pull between, let's say, Kama and Artha, right? Desire and kind of duty, or not duty, like accomplishment, right? Versus doing your dharma and then ultimately going to moksha, right? And so it's interesting in that if they were kind of looking at it as if Kama and Artha are sort of like the equivalent of, like, there's the path of the pleasant, right? There's the what is it? I'm just having a brain fart on it. The Shreyas and Preyas, right? The pleasant and the path of the good, right? That we tend to think, well, pleasant stuff is often not good, and good stuff is not pleasant, right? But there's this concept that I thought was really interesting where it's called pratibha. And pratibha, maybe I'm probably not pronouncing it perfectly, but it's this sort of, the thought is that, you know, it says later in the Gita, Krishna's like, I am the valor of heroes, I am the beauty of beautiful, right? I am like, all that's best in the world is all coming ultimately from our divinity, right? So the thought is, in the Kashmiri Shaivism, kind of looking at this, is that the closer we get to God, the better we do in our worldly life, right? Because as we're doing good things, right, that starts to glow through. You become kinder, you become more amenable to things, you're gonna do better at your job, or have better, all those things, right? Better relationship with your spouse, your kids. So there's this kind of, the more we pull towards divinity, even within our life, we end up doing better, and then all the more so than in the afterlife, right, so to speak. So it's this interesting concept of that moksha is actually, in a certain sense, the merger of Kama and Artha with Dharma, right? And when we do that and together in one, that's actually moksha, rather than being sort of, well, I have to be good so I can't have fun. You know what I mean? So I just thought that was a really interesting, and so I thought about that, you know, when I was reading that quote, you know, I thought that was really sort of telling. And so then that kind of then folds over a little bit into, you know, verse 40, right? Where it says, on this path, effort never goes to waste and there is no failure, right? Even a little effort towards spiritual awareness will protect you from the greatest fear, right? So I think that's the other thing too, right? Arjuna even says it in the next chapter, I think, coming up. He's like, well, if I do all this spiritual stuff, right, and I don't make it all the way to liberation, I've lost all the fun in the world, right? I haven't gained the good, I'm not enlightened, so I'm not blissed out and like Satchit Ananda, right? But now I can't I've lost all my fun.
I think it's a gross misunderstanding, or
right? Well, but that's what Krishna says, no effort is lost, and you go to either heaven and enjoy, and then you come back, which we'll go there later, but so I think that's kind of reassuring to us, right? That like if we're doing this stuff, it can make us better within our life, and it sets us up better for wherever we ultimately end up on the other side of the veil, right?
I also think this quote's a great reminder to me as how I understand the spiritual path is that there is nothing to achieve. That is a completely misunderstanding and ego-based understanding of spiritual path. And having this as even a little effort doesn't go to waste. There's no failure. The fact that you are even trying means you've done it. Means you've already achieved the goal. Right. So for me, that quote alone is like a very near and dear reminder of like just the fact that you're sitting here. Yeah. You did it. Good job. Yeah. But also the fact that you think you did it. What is it?
Right. I think there's sort of a perennial question that comes up. Is the desire for liberation a desire?
Right.
That's always in study circles. There's always that question always comes, right? Oh, you say to be desireless, but you have to have a desire to do your sadhana, right? To do your spiritual stuff. And then if you read certain like gurus or authors or stuff like that, right? And they're like, well, you don't have to do anything. Like Krishnamurti is like the king of this, right? He's like J. Krishnamurti, right? He's just like, yeah, you don't need to do anything.
Also not true.
And it's like, yeah, maybe at a certain point, or like there's this guy, Robert Adams, who was a devotee of Ramana Maharishi. He's like, there's nothing to do. You don't have to do. You just be, and you're just there, and that's all there is. It's like, yeah, that's like the way
That's
I look
great
at
for
it.
some people.
Well, it's like a rich person saying, there's money's not always cracked up to be. And it's like, yeah, I'll worry about that once I'm there, right? Like, that's nice. So I think that's the tricky part when we read some of these scriptures too, right? Is that we don't know where these people are speaking from, and so ultimately, yeah, that may be ultimately true. But those of us that are sort of still not there, we do have to have something to kind of motivate us to move in whatever that direction is, right? And then eventually, then we leave it off, right? Like we can leave off that desire. The analogy is used as like the boat crossing the ocean, right? You need the boat to get across, or the river, or whatever.
And then you get off.
Once you're on the other side, then you leave that behind too, and ultimately goes as well. But yeah, that's something that's constantly like wrangled. And like we have some young people that will ask like questions to me and stuff, and they're like, well, we read the Tao Te Ching, and I'm like, I love the Tao Te Ching, but it's like really high level, like really high level.
Which one, sorry?
Tao Te
The
Ching.
Tao Te Ching, it's the Lao Tzu, like with the yin and the yang and the Tao, and
Oh, I haven't.
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book for China, basically. And it's all about very passiveness and very non-aggressiveness, and water erodes rock, and non-doing, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff that you can see where people can kind of get caught in a trap of doing nothing then. They can justify doing nothing because it says in the Tao Te Ching here to do nothing, right? And it's like, no, you need to do something before you can do nothing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Travel or carry water.
Exactly. Well, it even says, like, here, where is it?
In the 38, I think it says that engage in this great battle and you will be free from sin. So, like,
Right.
And the 38? 3?
Right. Yeah, engage and you'll be free from sin.
Yeah. So I think earlier, Arjuna he was shaken because he was having the battle.
Right.
And he thought that it will be sin to kill his kings, but like Krishna explained that, hey, you have to do your battle and it will not be sin, and it will actually free you from the sin. So which was like,
To not do it would be a sin.
yeah, do not do it.
Right, there's an error of omission too.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, and there's actually a word through that, I guess. It's pratyavaya, where it says sin accrued through the non-performance of your enjoined acts. So you have a wife and a family and kids, and you just say, well, forget it. I want to be a swami now, and you just, you disappear. Right? You've sinned, even though you've become a swami.
Yeah.
Right? So, if you've left them in an inappropriate place, you've actually broken your dharma, right? As a father. So that's, you have to be careful. We have to be careful with that, right? All right, well, let's keep moving, because like I said, I want to make sure we hit everything. 41, it says, seek me alone, those who follow the path, resolving deep within themselves to seek me alone, attain singleness of purpose, right? So that just was and that's one of those on the paper that I'd given you guys last time, and then, it reminded me of, sort of in the Yoga Sutras, there's the, for the removal of the practice, removal of obstacles, the practice of concentration on one principle is to be done, right? It's verse 32 in the sutras. So that's why, also we need to sort of have that singleness of purpose, because it's easy to, again, there's another famous Tao Te Ching saying where it's like, my job is to stay on the main road, right? But people love to get distracted. Like, we love to take all the side roads, right? And so then in that sense, it's kind of like the analogy of like a magnifying glass where you concentrate the sun, right? You can burn the whole, versus if we're scattered all over the place with our energies, right? Then we don't have that singleness of purpose, and then we're not going to be as successful, right? So that's why sometimes, sort of releasing things that are distractions, I think, is important for us. Any thoughts on that?
Is it trying to convey that, hey, whatever work you're doing, the main purpose is to attain that moksha? Like, even if you are your day work, you're helping your parents, or any work you're doing, it is you are doing with that singleness of purpose, and you're thinking that hey, whatever good deeds I'm doing is for that purpose. Is that it is trying to say?
I think it's that we like to distract ourselves with, because we're getting attached to these roles that we've taken on. So I think, if we look at it, right, there's two layers to what we're here to do, right? We have individual swadharmas, right? So your swadharma is to do what you're doing right now, that you took on that role, right? And then we have the larger dharmas, right, which is ultimately to graduate from university. So you're an engineering major or whatever, IT, so you had your particular coursework, I was a medicine major, so I had my coursework, so we have slightly different dharmas than that, but ultimately the goal is to graduate from uni, right? So I think there's those two layers, right? And that's why, and again, there's a verse that's coming up in another chapter where it says, it is better to do your duty imperfectly than to do the duty of someone else well, right? Because if you think about it, what drives your swadharma? Why are you doing what you're doing? Why did you marry Arzu? Why are you why?
Yeah.
Right? Well, because you had, in a certain sense, if we look at the reincarnation, right? And if you have particular vasanas or samskaras or whatever word you like better, right? From your last birth, right? Then you have those tendencies that then your sort of atma or your jiva, right? Or your atma created this jiva that you are now in, right? With your current karmas that you're doing, you said, okay, these are the lessons, right? What's the current karma? I'm just going when it's your like, oh, it's my. They don't say it's my karma. It's not agami, sanchita, and then your. I'm just having a brain fart on the word. It's your karma. Like this time where I'm like, oh, I cannot help it. It's the divine will, right? So your vasanas created your current birth situation, right? So that's why it's so important for you to work on your particular set of vasanas and your particular swadharma that's different than mine, because I have my own problems, right? That's why it's so important for you to do it, but we need to focus on our stuff and not get distracted by all the distractions that are out there, right? At least not so. And again, and then the last thing, and I'll shut up, it's, there's those old jokes within this where they talk about like the last thing that you say before you die, right? That's what's going to drive your next birth, right? So the shopkeeper names his kid Rama, Krishna, Parvati, Lakshmi, and Shivji, right, or whatever. And he's on his deathbed and he looks around and he sees all of his kids and he's like, wait a minute, Shiv, Krishna, Parvati, Rama, you're all here. Who's minding the shop? And because that's ultimately what that was his mantra, was the shop, right? So in that sense, a lot of people argue against that and say, look, the thing that's going to be your last thought is going to be the thing that you thought about the most throughout your life, right? These little games, you can teach a parrot to say, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, but when the cat goes, it's going to go, wah! These are the kind of the jokes that the Swamis tell, right? So anyway, so that's why that singleness of purpose is so important, right? And then if it kind of folds into that, if we go down to 44, right? Those whose minds are swept away by the pursuit of pleasure and power are incapable of following the supreme goal and will not attain samadhi, right? Because your focus is just, you're still bought into the game, right? So in that sense, you're just not going to have the same interest, right? So in that regard, it just may not be the same, right? Any thoughts on that? Good? John? All right. So if we go to the top of the next page on 45, just a quick, we get into it later in the Gita, but did one of you guys, and I gave you on the paper, but do one of you guys want to talk about the gunas and explain the gunas and what that means? If you know it, if you don't, I'm happy to do it. I don't want to belabor it, but that way it's a good thing, it's a very important concept to know.
Are those the Rajasic, Tamasic, and
Rajas, Tamas, and
Sattva.
Sattvic?
Anyone want? I can do it.
Maybe we can take
I just
one
want to give you guys a chance to talk.
Maybe we can take one each. I can take
Sure,
one.
let's go.
Which would you like?
I can go with Rajasic.
Rajas? Okay.
Rajas.
I'll do Sattva.
That's it.
I can go with Tamasic.
Okay.
Okay, so before we get into the particulars, and again, you have it on the paper, so that way if you forgot it, what are the gunas? Like, let's go up one level before we get into the actual details of the three. Does anyone know like where that even comes from and what that's about?
The gunas are the different types of powers of Prakriti. Is that what it is? Yeah. And they come in different, I don't know how to say, like types of energy, and are always in flux. So you might have a huge amount of rajas, but that means you have a very small amount of tamas, and usually those have to like always balance out each other. I will say how actual energy works, where energy can either be created or destroyed, it just transfers constantly.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think last time you were saying there's a spectrum, right? Activity and inactivity and unactivity. So
Right.
and you're constantly going back and forth in that spectrum of the characteristics of any action
Yeah.
or your personality.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else? So the concept of this, of the gunas, it actually harkens back to Samkhya philosophy, which predates pretty much, it's like the backbone of all of Indian philosophy. It was from Kapila Muni. That is where it's the Purusha and Prakriti, right? So Purusha is the kind of the consciousness, the passive consciousness. But they, in Samkhya, they believe that Prakriti is a separate entity. And when Prakriti is like in balance, there's no manifestation of the cosmos, right? It's just like, it's like that pre-manifest, almost like the Hiranyagarbha, right? And so, but when Prakriti, which is made of Tamas, Sattva, and Rajas, right? When Prakriti pushes out to start manifesting and then there's imbalances, that's what creates the universe. Okay, so it's the imbalance of Prakriti, or the nature or the material stuff of the cosmos, right? And so then Vedanta, pretty much almost every Indian philosophy is pretty much adopted, and there's little versions and different sort of little subtleties that we don't need to sort of belabor, but the thought is so that Vedanta has very much adopted that model in terms of the balance in our natures, right? So that's where then those kind of come in. So they'll describe the three gunas. You should be free from the action of the gunas, right? Because ultimately the gunas are not us, right? Prakriti is not us. Everything past I am, even your mind, your thoughts, your intellect, your body, your emotions. If I am angry, there's an I amness that's appreciating anger. That's separate from anger. Because then in the next moment, I am happy, right? So we identify ourselves as anger or happy or whatever because of our false understanding, our attachment to our body and our thoughts. But if you think about everything past, the only thing that's true is aham. Aham, I am, right? In Sanskrit, right? So everything that's the object is not us.
Transitory state.
It's something that's not us. So everything then in that sense is Prakriti.
So it's like I'm not angered, but I'm angry.
So there's anger manifesting within your thoughts, mind, body, whatever, but that's all made of Prakriti. You are ultimately transcendent of Prakriti. Our problem is that we identify with those things, and so that's where we get trapped. Does that make sense? It's kind of like if you're watching a good movie and you get sucked into the movie, right? And the guy dies or the kid dies, or, or whatever. That's the Purusha, right? Is the director, the star, the writer, the screenplay, right? And in that sense, this is all the lila, right? The play of God, right? But where we go wrong is, again, we get caught up in the drama. We get caught up in the movie. And that happens long enough, and then here we are. Does that make sense?
So it's shifting from I am angry to, oh, this is the part of the story where there's anger.
Right. Ideally, because you've practiced separating yourself from emotions, right? So that you can pull back. That's detachment, right? You know, we think, oh, detachment means you're a swami or you're a monk and you become a sannyasa, right? It's like, no. It's the actual sannyasa
I'm
is
still
detachment from those things. You can feel anger, but you don't become angry, right? I feel anger feelings or whatever because of whatever, right? Or I feel happy feelings or whatever, right? But you don't identify yourself as that.
I have happiness, not I am.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's almost like I liken in Spanish, right? In Spanish they kind of do that where it's like in English we'll say I am cold, whereas in Spanish they'll say tengo frío, like I have cold, right? So it actually kind of in a way in the Spanish language it kind of does that. You're not identifying yourself as that thing, right? So it's that. So anyway, so let's go quickly through the gunas. I don't remember which one you guys were each taking.
Should we start with Thamas versus? Yeah.
Do you guys want? Do you want one of these sheets again, or you guys got it?
Which one starts?
It doesn't matter.
I'll start with Sattva because I'm speaking. So Sattva or Sattvic energy is supposed to be the highest of them. It's purity. It's that glowy, blissy feeling, and in a way, it can also be a trap because you can be attached to that happiness and want to constantly be in that state. But just like every other part of this prakriti, it passes. So sattva is that purity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that calm, contemplative, pure, tranquil, that stuff. Yeah.
Rajasic is like associated with activity and energy, and sometimes maybe opulence and pleasure. Like so, Rajasic guna is, as you know, it's Raja means king so it comes from that etymology, and Rajasic is associated with energy, activity, and pleasures.
Yeah. Good.
Tamasic means ignorance, so being ignorant of either your surroundings or your own nature or whatever state you are in, and just being too lazy to even think of your own identity, your own consciousness, your own self.
Yeah. So it's that darkness, it's inertia, it's darkness, it's ignorance, it's the thickest sort of veil, right, that you could have. And again, later they'll describe it as one is like sattvic guna is to get rid of it, it's like smoke off of a fire. It's very easy to get rid of it. It obscures, but smoke is easy to kind of blow away. And then I can't remember what they use for rajasic, but then tamasic is like the child in the womb, right? Like it's so deep and so embedded, right? There's something in between. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But so the tamas is the darkest, densest layer of ignorance that you have. And so most of us are kind of mixes of rajas and tamas, right? And then we'll have glimpses of, you're sitting in the Bhagavad Gita study group, you're feeling very spiritual, right? And you go out on the bar and then someone cuts you off and then, right? So then you've lost it. So we're all striving to be more in a sattvic state all the time, right? Ideally. But even then we still have to transcend it.
So is it like the Thomas state is hard to get out from, or to
Yes.
move away from all the inertia? Okay. It's very hard to get
It's hard to get out of tamas, right? Because you may not even realize that you're in ignorance, that you're even in the darkness. And so that's a very, very difficult place to break through, right? So that's where you'll see people just have no interest, right? They just want, whatever pleasure and whatever worldly things they want, and they just have no interest in any of this stuff. And they're just still deeply in that ignorance, or they're still very attached to the world and their body, and that's okay. That's okay. We're here, so we're not exactly like liberated saints, so we're in no place to judge, right? We've all been there, But in theory, and that's kind of even to sort of go back, and again, I don't want to get too lost on this, as I pulled in some of those quotes from the Vidika Chudamani from Shankaracharya, where he's sort of one of the highest gurus of Advaita Vedanta. He says, "Is there a man who, having somehow gained human embodiment, which is hard to get, having the masculine, meaning like the brave temperament, right, and also the complete knowledge of the scriptures, is foolish enough not to strive hard for self-realization? He verily commits suicide, clinging to things unreal," right? So the fact that, in a sense, we're here looking at this stuff means that we've worked through. Now, you're not saying that we're perfect and we're not getting egos about it, but the fact you're even sitting here shows that you've at least done a lot of the work already, right? And so you're not that far away. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, you'd have no interest. You wouldn't be here, So, so in that sense, I think sometimes it can be a little bit, you can feel just dejected sometimes because it's a hard path, right? And it's lonely and it's not easy, but, we're getting close. So it's like we should all take sort of, I think, comfort in that, in a sense. Anyone else?
I agree a lot with what you just said. I think a lot of this chapter gives a lot of reassurance in how lonely this can be. A lot of it is seek refuge, look inward to find me. Because you are going to feel like, I don't have anybody, I don't have the support, what do I do?
Yeah.
It's okay, just look inward, have resolve, deepen yourself alone. Because in times like this, you're not going to have externals. And, I mean, there aren't a lot of other people in this room with us.
Right.
So,
Right.
when you leave here, seek within yourself. It's already there. In the attitude of detachment. And I think it's not detachment like I don't care, like apathy.
No.
It's, I see it more as just like sheer acceptance. Just like, yeah, it will be what it will be. And because I have this resolution that no matter what happens, because I have this resolution of faith, it doesn't matter what I do, because that is what will have to happen. And it may be rough, it may be painful, but that's okay, because if I'm doing the detachment, even with the pain and the suffering that may come from it, that's okay too. Yeah, detachment, super great, practice that.
Yeah. It's easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. But I think also, that's, you probably, again, being of Indian origin, you probably know, like, Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Tvameva Bandusha Saka Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, right? It's your mother, your father, your friend, your everything, right? And I think there's a lot of that, right? Because when you're a sadhaka and you're on this path, unless you're in an ashram or you're with all these other people, right, it can't be tough, right? You're hearing and also, that's part of the reason we started this thing. It was like, we need kinship, right? Because it can be lonely, So, okay. Anything else before we keep moving?
I like the end of verse 50 of, therefore devote yourself to the disciplines of yoga, for yoga is skill in action. I just like that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah. And
How do you interpret that? Skill in action.
Yeah, so I think there's two things, right? There's the two kind of, again, there's two definitions of yoga that is often, so that it's kind of nice because, again, there's all the hatha yogis, right, that will constantly interpret with the Yoga Sutras, right? Where in the Yoga Sutras, so there's the end of 48, it says yoga is perfect evenness of mind, right? And so yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, right? It says basically yoga is cessation of the movements, the vrittis, the movements of the mind. And then yoga is skill in action. So, there's these two sort of, there's all these definitions of yoga throughout all of this, right? So I think in that sense, my feeling, before I stop, any ideas, any thoughts? No one told us.
So let's say some XYZ person is doing a good thing and you don't relate to that. Whatever they are doing is their own business. So that's how you should view your own actions too. That whatever you're doing is like none of, you're just doing it because you have to do it.
Right.
And that skill is, it's like, if that is an action, being equanimous,
Yeah.
Yeah, equanimous.
and just having that. It's all about like attachment, being attached to whatever the fruits of the action is, or just doing it.
And on the detachment, I feel a lot of time it can go to that ignorance or that not doing anything.
Right.
So detachment should not be seen that hey, we are detaching and will not do anything, because it's, so we have to be very careful in interpretation that hey, it is detachment from the fruit of the work,
But not the work.
but not from the work, and you have to still work and yeah.
Yeah. So I think so in that sense, going backwards a little bit, kind of folds in, right? So at 47, they start talking about karma yoga, right? And so 47, and this is again my notable quotables, right? Where it says, "You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward." And then this is kind of folds back to what we were talking about earlier about misusing this philosophy to do nothing.
Inaction.
Nor should you long for inaction.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then if we kind of skip ahead, and then that will kind of fold into that. If you look at 49, those who are motivated only by desire for the fruit of actions are miserable, for they're constantly anxious about the results of what they do. Right? So if I'm constantly thinking about the results, then I'm not going to be able to do the job I'm here to do as well.
I
Right?
think of the analogy of like pulling an arrow and trying to aim, and if I'm overthinking it, then I'm not aiming
Right.
true.
Right. Because oh my gosh, if I don't win this contest, then my parents are going to kill me because they spent all this money to teach me archery, or this, or this, or this, or if I don't get the job, and I'm not going to be able to do this. So you're not going to be fully present to do the actual action. And so it's going to be a vicious circle. You're going to end up not performing as well as you would have done had you just let go of the fruits. Right?
Right.
So that's what I think, in my mind, the yoga is skill in action, is that because you've released, right, you get to that sort of, that detached place where, okay, I'm just the doer. I'm not the doer, I'm just the instrument, so to speak. And what happens, right? Then you can just focus on the task at hand, not be troubled by the outcomes at that moment, and then you'll probably end up doing better.
Right.
So that's why it's skill in action.
Okay. I like that interpretation a lot.
I think there's a fine line here. Even though you're not attached to the results, you still have to think of the consequences of your actions, right? So,
Sure.
So it cannot be just I'm going with the flow and doing whatever is happening. You still have to say, hey, if I do this, what happens? But you cannot be selfish about, hey, I'm doing this to get my reward.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, and there's a concept that it's the prasada buddhi, right? So prasad, right, is sort of the gift of God, right? So you have that mentality that the outcome is the gift of God. You did the action, whatever was the fruit was the prasad of God, in that sense. And so then in that sense you can kind of release it.
And on this one, I feel that when you're saying that you have to be conscious about your action, that obviously you're not attached to the fruit, but you should always have the consequence in mind. I feel that ties back to the dharmic karma, like your deed should be dharmic, so that whatever action you're taking is not, obviously you're not attached to the fruit, but your action should be dharmic and not have a bad consequences.
Be conscious of it.
Be conscious of it, yeah. But
But like sometimes it happens even after the best of your ability, the best of what you could do. The end result is not what you expect. And if that end result is not what you expect, you should just think of it as, it's an Indian philosophy that maybe whatever thing happened, it's just what was manifested in the past, in your previous life.
Right.
And whatever
Prarabdha.
happened.
That was the word I was looking for. Your prarabdha.
Yeah. So, just think about that, okay, now all my sins of the past or all my actions of my past life, they are just gone.
Mhm.
I can start it again
Right.
in the new path. following along what my actions that I have been doing with a good intention. And if again anything fails, you keep on doing it because you don't think your actions will lead to good results. You just do it and I'm just doing it. You will not think about the result, good or bad.
I like that. I think there's a lot that I think comes from intention. You may have the best intention, but the impact may not be good. And I think when it comes to that, all you can do is your best approximation of what is the most dharmic thing in this moment until you probably are given more information and you use discernment, intellect to be able to refine. But from there, it's just keep doing.
Yeah.
Just keep doing with your best intention. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that we do nothing.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we use it to justify doing things that we know are not the right thing to do, right? Or that we don't have to. You have to have desires, right? I mean, that's what, again, I don't even remember because it all just becomes a big blob in my brain, right? Krishna's like, I'm like Krishna and I still have to do work. Yes. Right? Like,
Still here.
I still work and I don't have to.
Chariot too.
Right? So in that sense, it's not saying that you become this just amorphous blob of nothingness. We still are going to have our various things that we're going to need to do in our individual lives. But at a certain point, I think it's an appreciation that maybe if things are meant to be or not meant to be, that that maybe it wasn't the way that your karma or whatever was driving you to go, right? And I think that's the concept of surrender, right? That's often hard for us to do, especially in the West, right? Where we're like, we don't want to surrender our will, but if life keeps closing the doors on you, right, then maybe it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe despite my best intention, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, And so now I have to sort of release that and then recalibrate, use my intellect, and then adjust, in whatever way that is. But it's not like I'm just going to keep pushing and pushing.
I feel like that's blind. That feels like blind faith to me, and that seems like just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think can also be a trap. And so I agree with you. Like you need to use your intellect. You can't just
absolutely
only blindly go in like this will all work out for the best.
Yeah. No, but that's that discrimination that comes in. It's like, and then being able to step out of it and sort of look at it objectively and say, look, this doesn't seem to be the way things are meant to be, or whatever, and then okay, well then do it up.
Right.
So,
all right. I think it's time to move on to the next part where Arjuna says, "Tell me more about those who live established in this."
Okay. Mm-hmm. So why don't you take that?
Okay. Can I just start with Krishna?
Yeah. However you want to do it.
They live in wisdom, who see themselves in all and all in them, who have renounced every selfish desire and sense craving tormenting the heart. Neither agitated by grief, nor hankering after pleasure, they live free from lust and fear and anger. Established in meditation, they are truly wise. Fettered no more by selfish attachments, they are neither elated by good fortune, nor depressed by bad. Such are the seers.
What is your take on that?
So I think it's that seeing the Atman in everyone is, I think, a given. Just those who constantly have that perspective gives you a perspective in which a lot of this is easier to do.
Does that make sense to everyone? What she said, seeing the Atman in everyone?
Makes this easier.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's what we had here. So it's like, there's a bit of me and there's a bit of you, and it's both the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it's trying to tell. That's what I understood. So if it's both the same, then that's what seeing the Atman opposite person means. So it's the same as well. It's not much different.
Right.
Its path is different, its choices are different, but it's still the same. I think that's what it asking to recognize.
Right.
And I'm like,
No.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what the goal is, right? Is to keep that sort of that point of view in your mind, right? Like in your consciousness when we're dealing with life, right? Is if we got to the point where we purified ourselves and we could have control of our mind enough to see that, right? That the Atma, the above, right? That I see you're the Atman, you're the Atman, you're the Atman, I'm the Atman, that animal's the Atman, this is the Atman, that bug is the Atman, right? Everything is that. Then how am I going to want to do injury to anything?
But Arjuna still has to fight the war, injure whoever is fighting.
Right.
He still has to do it because it's his dharma to do that.
Right, because he has to play the role. Right? But it's the Atman killing the Atman.
Right.
I mean, well, not the Atman, right?
Yeah.
It's a jiva killing a jiva.
Yeah.
Right? A player in the movie killing a player in the movie. But ultimately they're like the same Atman, right?
Yeah, it's like video game characters, just killing each other. Players still there.
In a certain sense, right? So yeah, I mean, so keeping that point of view, that's then, in theory, that would be the basis of compassion and wanting to do service and all of these other good things, because ultimately what's happening to you is the highest order happening to me, right? And that, I think, is really the basis of karma, right? Because if I punch you, right, I'm punching myself, right? I mean, like, universally, like in the big picture, right? So then, in a certain sense, then energetically, right, I have to get punched in the face because you are me, right? So that's why, but that's also, so then you can look at that, and that's kind of the tricky balance, right? Because then you can, on the one hand, we want to have compassion for all the things that are happening in the world, but then people can get really overwhelmed by that or really worked up emotionally and all that. And this is what I was saying kind of last time too. And again, people don't always like to hear this, but if you really look at it from that bigger picture, like with all this stuff going on in the world and all the injustices and all the terrible things and blah, 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 people get very emotional and freaked out over it all, right? And it's like, yes, we want to have compassion for that on the one hand. But on the other hand, if you pull out a little further, if you believe in karma, the oppressors were the oppressed. The oppressed were the oppressors. The killers were the killed, right? The killed were the killers. So when you look at, so this is why you say, well, how can these saints and sages sort of be so detached and removed from all of the injustices of the world? And it's like, well, they're pulled back so high. They're looking way down on everything, right? And saying, well, look, this is why Krishna's not bothered by killing these people. It's like, they're already dead, right? I've already killed them, Arjuna. You're just basically you're just the instrument of this, right? That's why Krishna's not bumming out about killing the Kauravas, right? Because he has that point of view of that, right? But it's Arjuna who's down here and seeing the tragedy of it all on killing my race and my teachers and all that, right? So where do we find that balance is the tricky part, right? Yes, we want to be compassionate, but there's also a certain level of that higher view too.
I like that the next verse talks about a tortoise drawing in its limbs, as a wise can draw in their senses at will. Also, this past week I have saved 2 tortoises off the side of the road who were in their shells, afraid to move because they were stuck in the middle of the road on 2-lane highway. And my first thought is, well, no one is going to stop for this poor little guy, and if that is me, I would want somebody to stop and to gently, not only just take me to the side of the road, but drive to the nearest part where there's water access and put the turtle back into the water.
Yeah, that's nice.
And that poor little turtle was very dry and was so happy to run into the water. So that type of perspective helps you do those little things.
Yeah.
Because
that tortoise is the Atman.
But it is also the Atman.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, and again, this is another one of those pull-ins that I, had given the paper with from the Yoga Sutras, right? As that tortoise, so that's Pratyahara, right? Or Uparati in Vedanta. So the 5th limb of the Ashtanga Yoga, right, in the Yoga Sutras is Pratyahara. And it's and the quote is from, that's why I gave the paper, right? I don't think I have the exact translation here because I just wrote it out, but it's, it's as it were, the imitation by the senses of the mind by withdrawing or limitation of the senses of the mind by withdrawing them from their respective objects. They're the highest mastery over the sense organs, by pratyahara, right? So that's the last stop in a certain sense before you start going into concentration, so dharana, dhyan, samadhi, right? And that's right.
Letting go of the senses.
Yeah, the withdrawing of the senses, right? Because if you're sitting there and you're just tossed and turned by so much, how are you going to be able to concentrate in meditation? It's just not going to happen. All you're going to do is sit there and you're just going to be thinking about your job, your this, it's just useless. You're not going to get much out of it, right? All right. Anything else on all of that?
So I didn't quite follow your example when you said that if you see the Atman in everybody, then, for example, what you said is like punching someone, and you wouldn't punch someone, but you're not punching the Atman, you're punching the Jiva, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing, like he's telling, Krishna is telling Arjuna to go ahead and fight into not killing the Atman. So that's why I didn't. So if I see the Atman in everybody, that doesn't prevent me from punching someone because I'm not punching the Atman. So that's why I didn't quite follow the example that you gave.
Because I think what it boils down to is your sort of, it's all about how you're looking at everything, right? The only thing that changes is perspective. This whole game is just changing perspectives, right? So, in the sense that Krishna is telling Arjuna to kill the Kauravas, and Arjuna is distressed because Arjuna is still identifying himself with his body, mind, intellect, and he's still identifying those guys as body, mind, intellect. Whereas Krishna, because he's looking at it from a higher perspective and realizing that these are all just, in a sense, actors playing in a role, right? So this is why, this is the inherent push and pull, right? So the way that I look at it, and again, because they'll use different examples of things, in terms of, but my favorite example that has made the most sense to me, and it makes sense to me, I guess, and I think I mentioned it in one of the other things, I think the very first one is, and this is not me making this up, by the way, this is like what much smarter guy, right? And within that dream now, I am suffering the consequences of me killing the guy. The guilt, the anger, the punishment, I'm in jail, I'm suffering all these things, all of these terrible things are happening, right, to me, within that dream of the murder, right? But the moment I wake up from the dream, right, who's the killer? Who was the killed? Where was the crime? None of it actually existed, right? It was all a projection of my own mind, within my mind, and I was at once the creator of the dream and the participant in the same dream, right? And so while I was in the dream, I was suffering the consequences, the karma, if you will, of the consequences of my action within that plane of consciousness, right? But the moment I wake up from the dreamer state to the waker state, now where am I? There was no such any of that, right? At that higher level of understanding. So what they say is because otherwise you think like, how the heck am I ever going to get off this birth and death cycle? Like, we've done however many innumerable lives, and how much karma have I accumulated over all these lives? Like, at a certain point, it's like, what's the point? If I'm just going to be on the wheel of birth and death forever, like, I'm just going to suffer, like, I'll never get off, right? I'm never going to get off, right? And so then it can be very discouraging to like, well, then what's the point of doing all of this? I may as well just go have fun. I'm going to be reincarnated anyway, so like, why not? Yeah. But what they say, what the rishis say is that you're only in a sense bound to the karma while you're still in that understanding of your level of consciousness is that you haven't pierced the veil yet, right? Of understanding of what actually is true, right? So we still are suffering that, so if I punch you in the face, then because I'm still within that level of understanding, I'm gonna have to reap what I sow and get punched in the face, so to speak, right? But once I wake up from that level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness, a Krishna consciousness level, if you will, then now I'm understanding it from a different perspective. It was just the Atma dreaming, as it were, this manifest universe, right? So the example, and you probably are familiar with it, right, is the example of the rope and the snake, right?
Yeah, Changa.
So, so when did the snake disappears the moment you recognize the rope, right? But until you recognize the rope, there's nothing I'm going to tell you that snake wasn't a scary snake, right? You're terrified. But the second I say, come on, and I shine the flashlight on it, it's a dummy, it was a rope. And you see now the rope, then suddenly ignorance is gone. And so now where was the fear? Where was the snake? Where was all of that? Did it? Right? But until and unless you break through that ignorance and recognize the true nature of it, meaning being the rope, then yes, you are not to face the various consequences of that until we get out of our ignorance. And that's basically what samadhi is, right? Or enlightenment, or nirvana, or kaivalya, or use all whatever wording you like for it. It's waking up to the true nature of the universe or consciousness, and it's just consciousness. And so we will suffer until we get to that point.
And most of the time, in that perspective, you would know I have no reason to punch you. And if you punch me, I understand you're doing that out of your own ignorance.
Yeah.
So, from that perspective, the punch karma, I'm dealing with it differently than if I was asleep and you punch me and what the heck, dude? Then I'm stuck in it, and we're dealing with that consequence.
Now you're circling it back around. Right? So that's why, and I think we talked about this a little bit in that first session, and I don't remember if it was you or there was another guy that was sitting there kind of were alluding to this, where this could be sort of misinterpreted or abused, right? Oh, well, then you can just justify doing bad things, right? And it's like, no, because if you're at that level of understanding and consciousness, because you see everyone as the Atma, as yourself essentially, you're not going to do that. Right? Because it's the nature of that you're gonna have compassion because it's your very self. And so in that sense, you're not gonna, they don't tend to, if they're misbehaving, it's because they're not who they say they are. Mm-hmm. These saints and sages or these gurus or these swamis, if they're, doing naughty things, it's probably because they're putting on more of a show than, they're playing a role and maybe aren't as high in terms of their actual understanding compared to what they claim. I'm not sure if that answers that kind of.
No, I think that helps.
It's hard, right? Like, and again, no one's saying that we're justifying doing misbehaviors, right? That's not it at all, right? It's just a matter of where are we in our level of understanding. And so again, that's sort of the danger, because we sit here and we'll read one book that could be geared for people at a very, very high level of understanding, and then we have other books that are going to be at a more beginner level, so to speak, of understanding. But we don't know the difference. These things were written so long ago. It'd be like the equivalent of we put a bunch of, again, I use math as an analogy a lot. Let's say you have a bunch of random math books from elementary to, high calculus or whatever, right? And you put it in some box and it's all mixed up in no particular order, and then you put it away for it in a time capsule for 500,000 years, and then and then someone comes back and then they unearth all these math books, right? But they don't know what order to take them in. And so then you're like, well, I want the best math book, so you pick up a calculus book. But you haven't taken the time to learn 1, 2, 3s and algebra and all of this, right? And then no wonder we're confused. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think there's the scriptures are unfortunately a little bit like that. Like we don't have the discernment to know which one's the really hard, high-level ones, and which ones are a little bit more of the easy ones that are more geared for us that are still a little more in the thick of things, right? And so that's where I think it's confusing sometimes. When you hear the different advices, and they're kind of contradictory sometimes.
Yeah, I guess the part that I'm having problem understanding is if you zoom out enough, then everything is subjective, right? Like you said, who's the killer and who's the one who's killed in a dream when you wake up. So I can take that same analogy and say, what's the misbehavior if I punch someone? If I zoom out enough and there's multiple lives and you're not one that cannot be destroyed or cannot be impacted.
The key is compassion. when you have that perspective and you also understand it is all me, it is all us, why would I punish myself?
Sure.
When I have that alongside the pull-out, it balances really well.
Yes.
I think it's only you know where you're at truly.
Right.
You can fool people, but if you're not truly there, then yeah, you're self deluded, right? If you're sitting there and you're acting like that we're this or that, and then we're still doing these behaviors, then that's we're being a hypocrite, right? And so you're not going to get away with it because it's one thing to understand this philosophically; it's a very different thing to embody it. Right? So we're all talking from the level of myself very much included, right? It's all at the level of the intellect. Now it's just a matter of how do we get it to seep down from the level of the intellect into the embodiment aspect of things. And that's something that takes time. Right? So yeah, no one's justifying anything. But again, only that's why, because otherwise then how can Krishna justify doing what he's doing? Right? I mean, think about that. Like, he's telling them to go to war, he's telling them to kill all these people, and then even worse, think about how controversial Krishna is. Think about when he was a little boy, he's stealing the gopis' saris, and they're all sitting there shivering naked, right? And he's having a good old time because he's making them one by one get out of the river nude, right? Before he give them back their clothes, right? People go, oh my God, he's scandalous, right? He's doing this mishmash, right? Or during the Mahabharata war, right, where he tells Bhima to hit Duryodhana on the thigh, which was against the rules. He tells them to fight at night, and he sends Nachikaya, whatever his name is, Gatotchaka, to fight at night and to fight breaking another rule of war. Or when Karna is stuck, his wheel is stuck in the mud, to strike him when he's stuck in the mud. And they're calling out Krishna, right? For all of this stuff. What are you doing? You're supposedly this righteous guy, and you're telling the Pandavas to do all this unrighteous stuff. So how do we reconcile that, right? So from our level of understanding, it's adharmic what Krishna is doing, but from Krishna's level, it's not, because he's just doing what he needs to do because he's the director of the play. But we're still down here, so we are not allowed to do that, so to speak. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? You're smiling.
No, I'm just saying that Krishna's view is that we are all a pale blue dot.
What's that?
We are all a pale blue dot. Earth is just a pale blue dot.
Right.
If you talk about it.
Look at the universal, the Vishwarup, right? That universal view. This is all just nothing. We're just we're not zoomed out. So we're doing okay. Okay. Anything else on that? I want to get to 62 because this is a really sort of super famous quote. Anything else before we do this one? So from 62 to someone want to read it? Someone besides me?
I'll read it again. I like to read out loud.
All right.
When you keep thinking about sense objects, attachment comes. Attachment breeds desire, the lust of possession that burns to anger. Anger clouds the judgment. You can no longer learn from past mistakes. Lost is the power to choose between what is wise and what is unwise, and your life is utter waste. Do you want me to stop there?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
So that's a really famous verse or two from the Gita. It's often referred to as the ladder of the fall. You'll hear people talk about this verse often. I personally so I'm going to read a counter quote and see if this sounds familiar. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Who knows who said that?
Is that Star Wars Obi-Wan?
That's Yoda.
That's Yoda, there you go.
Right? So, it's almost lifted right out of the Bhagavad Gita, in that sense. So this is, I think, a very important quote because it kind of tells us because again, how often do we think about this, right? We know better, we know things, and again, Arjuna will talk about it. We know the right things to do, but often we don't do it. Why is it that we don't know? Even when we know, why do we still not do it sometimes? happiness, right? And that's the devil and the angel kind of on each of our shoulders, that push and pull, right? So this is sort of, in a certain sense, they're kind of within the Gita, why we misbehave. Why do we get to anger? Because, it's that sort of that dominoing effect, right? Attachment makes desire, right? Then possession, and then if someone thwarts that, then I get angry, right? I get angry, and then I lose my sort of higher thought process, right? And then in a moment, then I do dumb things, right? And then that can then have consequences, right? And so then everything can be lost, right? Look at the Coldplay concert.
Yeah, and I think this is. I think this is the answer.
$500 billion Coldplay tickets.
And this is the answer to what question you were asking, that is it okay to think that punch is okay because we are looking at the Atma and we are not, this is just a play. I think this is very good, because lost is the power to choose between the wise and the unwise. So I think you will only punch, or you will only take those, you will only do those bad deeds if you are have that attachment and have that, which is then breeding the desire and then bringing the anger and then losing your power to choose what is wise and unwise.
Yeah.
Intellect part that you was talking.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that people will point out with this, in a certain sense, is that if we go to the next verse, or verse and a half, basically, got hiccups. But when you move amidst the world of sense, free from attachment and aversion, right? So this is, and I put on your papers at the end, in Indian philosophy, they love their opposites, right? So raga and dvesha, right? Attachment and aversion, right? Alike. So we don't want either of those. There comes the peace in which all sorrows end, and we live in the wisdom of the self, right? So we're still here, we're still living with everything, but this is, in a certain sense, what at the end of the day, right? What is it that we all want? What do you want in life? What do you want? What do we all want? What do we have in common? We want happiness, right? That's it. That's all we want, right? It's just a matter of you define happiness one way, and you this way, and another, and another. We all have different definitions of how we're ultimately thinking we're going to get there, right? But what they're saying, they often will say that ultimately this is what gives us happiness, right? Moving amidst the world of sense, free from attachment and aversion alike. Then you get peace in which all sorrows end, and you live in that wisdom of yourself, which again they say is Sat Chit Ananda, right? Sat meaning, right? It's eternal, unchanging. Chit is the knowing consciousness, and Ananda is bliss, right? So then we get that Sat Chit Ananda by being free from those two. So in that sense, it's that peace that passeth all understanding. Like if we're going to look at the Bible, Is that any comments on that? Okay. And then I think, if it kind of flips back over, right? If the on 66 at the top of the next page, the disunited mind is far from wise. How can it meditate? How can it be at peace? And if you're not at peace, how do you know joy, right? If you're constantly letting the mind follow the senses, they're going to carry your better judgment as the storms drive a boat off its charted course on the sea, right? You're not in control of yourself, right? If we're constantly just being tossed from one desire to the next, and we have no control over it. So that's why controlling those sort of that taking that internal control ultimately is what leads us to the happiness. So a lot of times we tend to think of discipline as unpleasant.
Discipline
right?
is great.
Right? It actually is. But we don't want to be told what to do, right? We don't want to have discipline. We don't want to restrain ourselves. I want to be free and have fun and do whatever the heck I want to do. But the question is it actually making us happy? I would say arguably no. I think the modern world is proof of that, right? And so it's kind of counterintuitive that the more we end up being disciplined, we ultimately end up having a higher happiness.
And most of the time you feel more free, and the more control you have. It's a weird paradox.
It is a paradox. It is a paradox. I mean, for me, like one of the things that I had spoken about in other contexts is that the root of discipline, the word discipline is discipulus, which in Latin is student.
Oh,
You know?
disciple, yeah.
So it had the same word as the word disciple, right? So then I would use the example of like Jesus and his disciples, right? And because a lot of modern people are sort of averse to discipline, right? And I'm like, well, discipline, they think discipline equals punishment. And it's like, no. Discipulus means student. So Jesus was the teacher of his disciples, his students, right? Jesus wasn't punishing them, right? He was teaching them. So in that sense, when we start to flip the script and understand what discipline actually means, right? It's the guardrails that keep us from going off into the river. Do I like the guardrails there? Do I want to rail against the guardrails and say, well, I don't need that? Well, fine, sure, but then there's nothing to protect me from going off the side of the cliff, right? Ultimately, who's going to suffer that? It's going to be me. Now, we can force it, but then we're going to have to suffer the consequences, right? So that's that paradox, right?
I also think people connect discipline a lot to the concept of motivation, and because they don't have motivation, they think, well, I can't have any discipline.
Yeah.
When I find motivation is such a fluctuating thing, just like any other of the gunas, like some days you really feel like, yeah, I could do this, I'm full of rajas, I could do this, and some days you're like, I'm tamasic and I don't want to do anything, and I don't feel like it. And I think discipline is kind of the solution to that, of like, I said I would because I love and value myself and understand what I'm doing and why. Making the choice anyways, to do whatever you said you were going to do anyways, that's discipline.
Right.
Is I feel the resistance of, I don't want to do the thing I said I would do.
Right.
And then choosing to do it anyways.
Right.
Resistance and then acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you think about like in the Yoga Sutras, right, when the yamas and the niyamas, right, like satya, all this other stuff, tapas, right, like to be a tapasi, right, like tapas is that consistency, that discipline aspect of doing things, right, so that you're not just, you're consistently working towards, your freedom, I suppose, right, and that's one of the first steps in the yogic sort of philosophy of Patanjali, right, is that tapas. So I think that's why it's there, right? Any other thoughts or comments?
I have a question. So when you say Satchit Anand, are you saying happiness is the goal of life? I always thought it was moksha was the goal of life, oneness with God. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when they say, Satchit Ananda, right, is the word that is used in a sense, is those are the qualities of Brahman, right, of consciousness, or the underlying current of the universe, or Shiva if you're more into kind of that sort of aspect of it, right? There's some similarities in the different philosophical schools, but so what all moksha is essentially seeing the rope for the rope and no longer seeing the snake, right? And so that's all moksha is. That's what nirvana is. That's what kaivalya is. That's what all of that liberation, enlightenment, whatever, all these words are all used to basically denote the same thing. It's that's ultimately our true nature, right? That's the true nature, not of just of us, of the entirety of the universe, right? And so the rishis, when they've gotten to that point, how do you describe the indescribable? Right? Anything you say, again, we're using a lot of Tao Te Ching today, but it's like the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. He who says does not know. He who knows does not say. Right? How can you describe something that's absolutely beyond the mind, beyond the intellect? How do you do that? Right? So the closest that these guys who have reached those heights have been able to kind of come back down and say, look, it's sat, meaning it's true through all phases of time, right? Past, present, and future, right? It's unchanging, right? It's chit, it's awareness, like pure awareness, and then that awareness is blissful, right? So it's not so much that, Brahman has those as its attributes, it's that those attributes are Brahman. Like you are pure bliss, you are pure awareness, you are pure, like you're eternal, right? And so that's that realization of that, of waking up, so to speak, from the dream, right? That's the moksha, that's the liberation.
Right.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, so you're not saying that happiness is the goal of life. You're just saying those are the attributes of Atman or Brahman, right?
Yes.
And so the goal of life is something else, depending on if it's moksha or whatever.
Right. I think depending on where, I think that's the ultimate goal of life, right? Is moksha, right? But not everyone is going to make that in any individual life.
Yeah, I mean, just like we have short-term and long-term goals,
Exactly.
right? So we might have.
But that's the end of the game. That's your graduation
Right.
from school, so to speak, right? Now, why did God do this? That's, then they debate that, right? That's where the philosophy schools start getting, the pundits start, knocking at each other, Is it that Brahman is just a passive kind of consciousness that does nothing? That's the Advaita position, and it's just that it's a superimposition because of Maya, of our ignorance, onto Brahman, right? Is it that? That's what the Advaita Vedantins say, right? Whereas the Kashmiri Shiva guys, the non-dual Kashmiris, say no, Shiva projected itself, right? They don't say Brahman, they'll say Shiva, right? But it was his Leela, his play, his drama that he wanted. So he's actively projected himself into this universe. We're still equally deluded, but it's the intention between the two. Was it a conscious act, so to speak, of that higher consciousness? Or is it just a simple a misunderstanding of us who are out here, right? And so this is like, they're arguing with each other like way up here, and all of us are way down here, right? So you can get lost in all of that mental game playing, right? But
Yeah. That is a good question. Why did the Atman separate from the Paramatma? Right?
well, it didn't. The Atman didn't separate.
But isn't the coming together the moksha? Like when you become one with the Paramatma?
It's moksha is that you realize that you were never not Atman to begin with.
That's my experience of it. And it's always been that.
There's no becoming. It's you're not becoming something you're not. You're just no longer identifying as something that you're not. It's realizing who you always were.
Okay.
So an example could be, I'm trying to think of an example, would be the ocean, right? The ocean and the wave analogy, right? So if the ocean of universal consciousness exists, and that is Brahman, within the ocean there's innumerable waves, some big, some small, some this, some that, and on it goes, right? So you're a particular wave in Hawaii, I'm a particular wave in Mexico, whatever. So we are each identifying ourselves as waves, right? So that wave, does the wave exist? Yeah, it exists. You can see there's a wave there, right? But does the wave exist outside of ocean? Right? No. So the only difference would be it's the frame of your understanding of self. So as long as we identify ourselves as wave, oh, I'm a big wave, I'm a beautiful turquoise Hawaiian wave, oh, I'm a muddy Galveston gross wave, right? Whatever it is, right? As long as we're identifying ourselves as wave, right, we're not understanding that we're actually ocean. And so the whole game, this whole game is literally shifting our understanding of ourselves from not identifying ourselves as a wave to identifying ourselves as ocean. But we were never not ocean. So the wave wakes up and goes, holy crap, I'm ocean. And the ocean's like, yeah, you always were ocean. Before you existed, you were ocean. While you existed as a wave, while you were so good and happy calling yourself Mr. Wave, you were ocean. And then after the wave breaks, you're ocean, right? So that's Sat. That's always existing, right? Pre-manifestation, during manifestation, and after manifestation. Anything that doesn't exist in all three phases of that, they consider asat, right? Not real, right? Not because it doesn't exist temporarily, because it does, the wave did exist, but it's not true in that highest sense. So all this is, it's not that we're like a bucket of water that's been separated from the ocean and going back in. It's that we've never been separated from the ocean. It's just our understanding has shifted now to understand that we were that all along. We were always that. It's just we were just misunderstanding who we actually were. That's why I like to kind of harken back to the beginning of the day, right? When these guys say, well, you don't need to do anything. You work J. Krishnamurtis or some of these things. Always think that we're not the ocean. So it's purifying in a sense, right? So to stop identifying with this, that are not true, right?
Working on your habitual patterns of thought and of being.
Yeah, I would like to quote some lines from the book that I'm reading.
Yeah.
I am, you are, this is, and that is. All these four are in respect of individuals, space, and time. This is limited conception. If this limited conception is not maintained, then universal is remains. When a striver is established in this universal is, he becomes completely free from the sense of I and mine.
Yeah. So